Hey there, this is Nick Zager and Remy is Dana. We are Mirlo Real Estate Partners. And today on the Dentaligentsia Podcast, we have Jill Allen of Jill Allen and Associates. Welcome.
Hi, thank you guys. Really excited to be here.
Absolutely. We're so excited to have you. Obviously, we're here because we both serve the dental community and
hmm
we want to help them answer hard questions and get better at what they do. And so we couldn't find a better person to have on our show, especially since you are kind of niched down even further into the orthodontic space. Want to
Yes,
tell us
yeah,
more about that?
yeah, for sure. So I am an orthodontic consultant. I have been doing this for the past 18 years. Been in the orthodontic industry for a little over 30, so you can kind of probably guess my age pretty quickly here. And it's been a really fun area to be in. I actually specialize in startup orthodontic practices. So, a lot of times when I'm talking to clients, I say, we're going to focus on the demographics to doors open phase and everything that has to happen while we're in that phase. And then once your doors get open to a year afterwards, just making sure that you've got all of your systems in place and you are ready to go. So that's kind of where I live and have just had such a fun time over the years, just helping doctors across the United States really get in and get their practices set up.
That's really cool.
How did you
Yeah.
first get involved in the dental space and then further into orthodontics?
Yeah, so it's kind of a fun story. So I actually started, believe it or not, in an orthodontic office way back when, and I was in the sterilization area. Like I was, like if you talk about big companies starting in the mail room, sterilization is the mail room for an orthodontic office, and I just really loved the space and was able to kind of work my way up. And I was really lucky to have worked for a fair amount of doctors that were really into continuing education. So I got kind of a taste of what consulting was like and, what it meant to have somebody come in and help a practice grow and get their systems in place. And so in my little brain back then, I was like, I think that's something I want to do. And so I just really worked really hard throughout my, initial years to learn every single area of an orthodontic practice. And then I finally decided, I think it's time. And I saw in our industry, we did not have any consultants that were focusing on startup doctors. And, I thought, gosh, these docs, they go to school to become really great clinicians, but nobody really, and I'm sure even dentists will say this, there isn't a lot of people that really focus on how do you get your business off the ground and running. And I just saw there was a niche for that within our industry and thought, you know what, I'm going to dive into that. And I guess it's history. 18 years later, it's still a really fun thing, and it's also kind of led me into, I work a lot with acquisitions too. So in doctors, I've got senior docs that are looking to sell a practice and I've got docs that are looking to purchase a practice. Just how do you make that transition work really well? And, especially with a new doctor coming in, if they've never owned a practice before, kind of helping in that area. So that's kind of how I got into it and where it has taken me from.
So what's the
And
most, I was
go
going to
ahead.
say, well, let me start over. We also we help dentists of all shapes and sizes, career stages, but our favorite transaction is really helping the startup dentist because they really need a lot of extra help, a lot of hand-holding at times, and they need to be, pointed in the right direction, and it's really scary. It's an enormous decision, and it's really expensive, and you can't mess up. And so it takes sometimes it takes a little bit more time, but it is ultimately, one of the reasons why we really appreciate that opportunity to work with those folks is because I feel like it's more rewarding. It's like, at the end of the day, after the lease is signed or after they bought a property, our job isn't done. We still have to help kind of facilitate and work with contractors and architects and it's a long process. And then once they're open, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have done it without you. And it's like, it's such a great feeling. And so that we really appreciate those types of opportunities also.
Yeah, that's great.
So I'm sure you have tons and tons of doing this 18 years, tons and tons of cool success stories. Any ones
Yeah.
that stick out that you'd like to talk about?
Oh, sure. I think think it's always rewarding, just number one, as you were saying, anytime you have an opportunity, especially a younger doc or a new doc that's, opening up their first practice, it's always very rewarding to help them, you know, bring their dream to fruition, right? To be able to walk them through and help them, get open. And, for me, we've got in the orthodontic world, we've got, pretty big benchmarks that we're looking for in a startup practice as far as how much production, how much collections they need to do in the year, and really kind of what sets them up to be a successful practice or not. And for me, what's always fun is when we have, docs, and I usually have one or two a year that will just really exceed those goals. And, for us in our industry, if we have a practice that's $1 million practice in their first year, that's a really big and exciting thing for us in the orthodontic field. So, I think, I won't call out practices in particular, but it's always fun when we have those, those docs that they just do all the things and work really hard. And then, they get to be a part of my $1 million club. And that's always a fun thing for me as a consultant and my team to be able to celebrate with them.
Yeah. So whether we're talking about specific KPIs or just general advice.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that a startup practice can look to do to become a part of that millionaire club?
Yeah. So, when we're talking about orthodontics, in particular, and again, I do work a lot with pediatric practices and orthodontic practices as well, but my main focus is orthodontics. So I'll be kind of speaking specifically more to the orthodontic profession. But, some of the big KPIs that we are always looking for is production, collections, AR, and new patients. And what's kind of interesting, to the audience, because I know you have a bigger dental audience, is that, unlike in a dental office where you produce and collect kind of in the same appointment, you can look at your schedule and say, hey, I know exactly how much I'm going to produce and collect in today by the procedures that are on a schedule. In an orthodontic office, we're producing off of a contract that pays out over maybe a 24-month period. And so, when we're looking at KPIs in a startup, we know that, okay, for a startup practice in orthodontics, we need to do a minimum of 300,000 to 400,000 in production in our first year, just to have a good baseline and a good practice. What that means for us from a KPI standpoint is that we know that there's kind of a rule of thumb in orthodontics where what we produce in 1 year, we're going to collect over 2. So if we produce 400,000 in our first year, we're going to collect right around 200,000 in our first year. And then that remaining 200,000 is going to come in the following year. So for us, we have this building AR, which, year after year, it gets bigger and bigger, and it just, continues to pay us out, which is why a lot of times orthodontics can at times outpace, even really successful dental practices, just depending upon how quickly, they get up and get moving. So those are, some of the KPIs in a startup that we're looking for. Another one is just, really making sure that we're paying attention to those new patients in. And, one of the things that I'm always talking to my doctors about is not just about converting them, but it's kind of that contact to contract component. And I think for our industry, this is something that for many, many years, I think it's just been easy. You put your sign out and people will come. Well, I think in all specialty, fields right now, we are all seeing, there's a lot of competition out there. And so, you really have to be dialed in and thinking about, okay, they may have contacted me. They may have been perusing on their couch at 11 o'clock at night, put an inquiry in to come in for a new patient exam. But if I don't have the right systems in place and my team doesn't get back to them till a couple of days, they've moved on. They're on to whoever that next doctor is. So there's a lot of really good systems that I think not only for orthodontists, but doctors in general, just in specialty, or anybody who's looking, to bring new clients into their business, that we really have to be paying attention now to that contact into whatever that exam or whatever that opportunity is for us to, present our cases.
Are you talking about systems as a part of a business model, or more of the marketing variety, or neither?
Actually,
or both?
I'm going to say it's both
Okay.
because, when you think about it, a new doc, you can spend, all this money on online marketing. Let's talk about it from a marketing standpoint. But if you don't have the systems in place to know what to do with those leads, you're kind of throwing money in a fan, right? If you can't, get those patients in, get them converted, get them, to actually, have an opportunity to at least present a case for them. So I think that there's a lot to talk about in marketing, and we can definitely do that. But then there's just a lot to talk about in those systems. And I think especially in startup practices, docs are so focused on all the other things that are very important. How do I hire my first employee? How do I answer my phone? How do I do this or that? That they kind of forget that on top of it all, I've got this whole big marketing piece that I got to be paying attention to. And do I have systems in place for that? And those are, a lot of times what we're working on, as we are getting them going in that first year.
That's really interesting. I mean, even as I think about my own business, which is not an orthodontic practice, you're getting leads coming in from all different platforms or all different sources, and sometimes you just get a text from your neighbor,
Yeah.
and it's gotta somehow get into the top of the pipeline and make its way through the process. So that is something that somebody really needs to think about. And if they don't, it can be, it's where you might lose a lot of potential patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like
And a lot of money too, potentially, depending upon what you're spending, what your ad spend or what your marketing spend is. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, not at all. I was just piggybacking on what Nick shared. I feel like, not to say that we have it figured out entirely today, but I feel like the last couple of years we've spent trying to figure out and refine our systems so that we knew what to do with all of the information coming in effectively. So, it sounds like whether it's marketing or implementing systems, especially for a startup, those are things that you obviously provide and help with. Yeah. How about common challenges that you're seeing in orthodontics, where maybe you have some solutions you can share, or just talking about those challenges, to help people think more about them and how they can overcome them?
Yeah, and I think it's, the first challenge that comes to mind, and I don't think that this is just even within our own orthodontic industry, but just in the dental specialty, specialty as a whole, is that there is a lot of competition out there. And, I think one of the hardest things is, how do you, as a new doctor, differentiate yourself from all the other doctors that are out there? How do you get a patient to say, I'm going to choose to spend my time with them versus doctor down the street? And, I can't tell you that I've got like the secret sauce answer, as if I did, I'd, be, probably doing something else, but I think what we have to do, and what I'm always coaching doctors to think about, is, it starts with just your marketing. And what does that look like? What does your brand say? What does your brand communicate? Is there brand confusion when somebody's out there and they see an ad that maybe you're doing, and then they go look at your website and it looks like, they're two different companies, and then they fill out the online, little widget, and it comes back like a robot just responded to them. And then, or they don't even get a response, and I think that the practices that excel are the practices that have really thought about every impact and how, that patient experience comes across. And it's not just patient experience when they come in your door. It's patient experience on how they interact with your website, what they read and see on your, we'll call it your social proofing, which is really your reviews, right? All of those different things. When a practice has got that all dialed in, that, in my opinion, is what sets them apart from somebody else who, like I said, may have a lot of brand confusion or just not really have it all dialed in and tied in. So that's kind of one of the areas I think about.
I mean, certainly patient experience is a huge is a huge thing that I think it's like one of the recurring themes that we talk about with a lot of the people on this show, just because of how important it is. From the time that somebody, not just the elements that you had talked about, but just what is the experience actually the first time they walk in the office? Who is the person who is greeting them? What are they? How does that feel? And is it inviting? And do they? You really gotta knock it out of the park, because you really don't have another opportunity to do it. And so I think those types of things really need to be considered strongly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would also say, nowadays more than ever, just really embracing living in a digital world. I think we could all agree none of us want to go into an office and be handed paper, right? None of us want to have, we want to be able to get our forms ahead of time and fill things out ahead of time and, be ready. And I think it doesn't matter which specialty we're in. There's a lot of really great programs out there. There's a lot of great tools to help us just be better, but it's thinking about it from the beginning and then implementing that just to make ease of access, think about taking away all barriers that you can to make it so it's easy for a patient to show up, easy for a patient to communicate, and easy for a patient to say yes to treatment. That's ultimately what I think, really helps us, be those $1 million practices.
How does a doctor create a strong team? Obviously, I'm sure that you, starting in the sterilization room, have a really good, probably have a really good answer to this. I mean, having built your way up to be now coaching, dental leaders in the orthodontic field, how do you kind of get everybody on the same page? And when you have, let's say, somebody that's not a great fit, I mean, it's not easy, but sometimes you gotta pull the plug sooner than later.
Send them away with love is what I say. Sometimes we got to send them away with love. But, it's such a good question. And I think there's probably a different answer if we were talking about a startup, and a different answer if we were talking about an existing practice. So since you kind of alluded to an existing practice, let's just kind of talk about that. I think number one, and this is kind of a hard thing, and, for any docs that are listening, it starts with you. You have to know the vision of your practice, and you have to know what you want out of your practice. What is the culture that you want? What is it that you want your patients, like I just said, to experience? And what is that like within your office? Once you can identify that, then I think it's a matter of, does your team understand your vision? Because nobody can read anybody's mind. I've been married 35 years and my husband still doesn't know how to read my mind, doggone it. And you think about it in an office, we are like a family, and you would think that we should be able to know the doctor's vision. We think we know what the doctor wants, but as a doctor, have you actually communicated to your team your vision, where you want the practice growing and going? And then from there, evaluating your team members and saying, do I have the right team members in place? Because sometimes we hire people out of, this is a Band-Aid hire, this is I just need to get somebody in, but they aren't moving in the same direction as where your practice is going. And if you do the work, it becomes very easy to see when you've got the wrong, either team member in the wrong seat of the bus, or they just need to be, like I said, kind of sent away with love. And I always try and encourage my docs to think of it this way. Just because somebody doesn't work out in your practice, or they were your first hire, or they've been a long time hire, doesn't mean they need to be a forever hire. You're growing, hopefully, as a doctor. They're growing as a person. And sometimes we just naturally grow apart. And that's okay. We shouldn't take it personal. But yet, if you want a good, successful practice, you really have to do kind of some of that hard work. So that's some of what I think about. The other thing is, I highly encourage my doctors to do check-ins with their teams. And, this is not a check-in once a year. Hey, I'm going to give you the litany of things that you did 9 months ago that I didn't like. And, let's talk about how you can be better in this next year. I call them rhythm meetings, where we are meeting with team members and we're finding out where they're at, and we're finding out how we can help them, and we're finding out what do they need to make their job better. Do they see things that we can help them with? Because again, ultimately, I think it rolls uphill. You are the leader, you are the owner, and it is ultimately up to you. And that's a hard thing for doctors sometimes because they want to be like, oh, I want to put my office manager in charge of that, or I don't really like conflict. The reality is you got a business, you kind of have to step up to the plate sometimes. So I know that was a little rambly, but that's kind of what comes to mind, first off for me.
You gave the playbook for the send them off with love right here. So for anybody watching, I hope they were taking notes. It's good practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what would your answer be for a startup?
Yeah. So for a startup, this is where we do a lot of work with our startups. And have you identified, your core values? Have you identified where, have you actually thought about not just I want to have a practice, but, what does that practice look like? What do I envision the culture of my practice? And then as we start to hire, we are thinking about those core values in the people that we're hiring, so as we're going through a hiring process and we're kind of evaluating, does this person fit into these values that I have for my practice? And can I see them fitting in? And this is something I say to all of my startups. Your first hire is never going to be a forever hire. It is okay if somebody fits a need for a season in our practice, but as our practice grows, they may or may not grow with you. And don't take it personal. It's just part of doing business. And so, our first hire in a startup may be one person that's doing a lot of roles, but they aren't really great at anything. We need them for what we're training them for. We hope that we'll be able to move them into another role. But if they aren't, it's okay, because we'll be ready for that next person, and we will have identified what that next role is going to look like and the needs out of that kind of next level employee that we're hiring.
Yeah, I mean, some solid visioning and creating kind of a I guess that those. Why am I losing my train of thought? Just the core that you wanna project, and your staff has to also kind of mirror the same those same things. That's pretty huge. I mean, you can really, by hiring the wrong person or having the wrong person in the wrong seat on the bus, it can really kind of affect everybody's morale on that team. You want to really have everybody looking in the same direction so that you can serve your patients the best.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
I imagine as a business owner, a lot of times it may be hard as a new business owner to have somebody to be accountable. Your staff and your patients are accountable to you, but somebody's got to be able to say, hey, what about this? Or maybe we should try to do this differently. And so it's a really tough job, I imagine, for a new dentist to kind of navigate through a lot of the different pitfalls that may happen. And I suppose that's where somebody like you comes in.
Yeah.
How do you, leadership starts from the top, but you want everybody to kind of hold the rope and have a sense of accountability. Are there any tips or ideas that you convey to your clients about how to really be a strong leader?
Sure. So, one of the things that I try and encourage my docs is, we don't need supermans and superwomen out there. You've heard about the Superman and Superwoman syndrome, right? Where, they, try and do it all and, don't let anybody else. But we've got to be able to have an understanding of what's going on so that you can kind of manage from atop and just make sure that your team members are doing the right things without you, we'll say, micromanaging, if that kind of makes sense. So, one of the things that we really coach on and work on is helping our doctors understand kind of how they keep control and understand of what is going on within each of the core areas of the practice: financials, treatment, coordinating, communication, clinical, but yet still allow the autonomy of the team member to do their job without, hey, I noticed you haven't picked up the phone and called this person yet. Hey, I noticed you haven't, you know what I mean? So, kind of helping them in that way. And that's a tough thing. You guys are business owners. I'm a business owner. I can tell you the Jill Allen that I was 18 years ago is very different than the Jill Allen that I am now and who I hope to be, 20 years from now. And so, I think some of it especially for a new doctor is it's so important to keep control of it all, but yet also to not find yourself in a place where you are micromanaging so much that you can't get out of your own way and you become your own bottleneck, which is what I tend to see a lot of doctors do, which then stunts growth, which, maybe makes for, work environments that don't work very well, things like that. Did that answer your question? I might have got off on a little rabbit trail on that one, but.
I think so. Has anybody ever made their way to you? Maybe I would imagine that you probably want to find your clients sooner, on their journey than later inside of a startup. But sometimes,
Oh yeah.
they're stuck or they're in a place where they're really scared and they have the build out is happening and then they're trying to put things together and build a website and do all those things. How do you guys handle, or how do you guys, help coach them through those types of challenging situations where there's a lot of fear and it's almost visceral at times because it's them, they're on the line,
Yeah.
they got to make it work.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we do work with practices in all stages of their life. So I focus on startups. I focus on, I call it the 8 years and younger crowd. But, I've had plenty of doctors that, come mid-career and are just like, I'm burnt out. I don't know where to go. My practice is dying. I can't keep team members, whatever. Or, at the end where they're like, I want to retire, but my numbers aren't going to allow me to retire. And so what do I need to do? So, I help in all stages. And, to speak specifically to if it were a startup, what I always say, and I have plenty that come to me, they may be a year in and they're like, I'm not hitting my numbers. I just am, I'm barely keeping my head above water. I don't know what to do. Am I going to have to file bankruptcy? All of these things. And what we try and do when we work with doctors like that is say, number one, okay, take a deep breath. We got you. There isn't anything that you've done that we can't help you with. And, it doesn't mean that it's going to change overnight, but there isn't anything that we've seen or that we're going to see that we can't fix. And I think it's just, sometimes just letting them see that they've got this lifeline out there to, and to know that I've got a lot of years, I've seen it all. I mean, I've seen it where, we've had $200,000 in embezzlement and how do we come back from that to, I've seen, 100,000 in past due accounts and how do we come back from that to, just all kinds of things. And so, what I would tell doctors is probably the hardest thing. I think this way in anything in life is asking for help, and letting your guard down to say, this is tough. I know I should know better, but how should you know better? I don't think a lot of times we're taught this in school. You can't talk about it with your peers on Facebook groups because you don't want somebody to know what's going on. And so I think letting down the guard to be able to say, hey, I need help, and trusting somebody to come in and help you and, kind of help you build it back up. Probably the hardest thing is doing that and then taking those steps to move forward with it.
My mind is racing here all over the place. So I'm thinking, the fear we often deal with the fear that a startup doctor experiences really with any project because they're all so expensive and there's so much on the line, but certainly for a startup. But, when you're describing almost like a midlife crisis situation where a doctor comes to you and says the practice is dying, I felt sad for a second there. That's really scary. And so, we usually cover the hopeful stories and the nice stories early in the podcast, but can you share with us a success story? Because I feel like the sense of accomplishment to be able to get involved in that type of circumstance and have things turn around, even if it takes time, and it
Mm-hmm.
probably always does, is amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I can think of one, and well, like, unfortunately, I've had enough that I've worked with that it's kind of like, well, which story do I want to take? But let's just talk about one recently where I had this was a doc that surprisingly had been a startup doc of mine quite a few years ago. Had been very, very successful. I mean, just doing great, doing phenomenal, and ended up having an employee that embezzled from them and embezzled a lot of money, like upwards, of 200,000. And to the point where the doctor had kind of lost sight of what was going on, and there was just a lot going on, and sometimes you just don't realize how bad it is until you check your bank account and are like, I've got less than $10,000 in my bank account, and I have got a employee over 20 employees, and I don't know how I'm going to make payroll. That's like an awakening, and you would think, but how could they not have known, or this, that, or the other? But it happens sometimes. And, to have that call and to have to, say, okay, this is scary. You're right. I don't know how you're going to make payroll. Let's talk about this. Where do we have, what do we, and to have this really hard conversation. And then how do we deal with this situation? How do we deal with an employee that, and it wasn't just one employee, there were multiple, there was, a lot of things going on. So now we're changing an entire team up, and now we're taking things over and really having to dive in and go from, zero money coming in to, but what's exciting is years later, they're thriving. Everything is, wonderful. And we get calls all the time, from the doc, and just, oh my gosh, I can't believe, I really thought, like, am I, I'm on the verge of bankruptcy here. How am I going to face my team and say, I can't pay you, even though you just worked for me? To now, it's not even a thought, and to be, double what they were when they first started. So it's things like that are, knowing that you have to do the hard work, and you have to come in and you have to, make the hard decisions, but that you can recover from it. So that's one situation I can think of.
Despite the horrible part of the middle of the story, that's neat that you got to work with them in two very different capacities at two very different stages of their careers. Like Nick and I have been at dare I say, countless where and they're usually the speaker is talking about embezzlement or protecting the practice, and and doctors, the only mechanism that they recognize from these stories is to work more. They don't connect the dots. They're already working 6 full days a week. They're struggling to make those payroll. And it's just like, maybe I'm not working enough. It's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah.
And it's not unique in those cases. So
yeah. But it's fun. It's fun to be able to, do that. Or like I always tell my docs when we walk in, not something as dire as that, but we walk in and, let's just say we've got such high delinquencies, and they're like, how are we ever going to do this? I always tell them, I'm like, you know what? We're not going to judge you. We are where we are, or if we're working with team members, I just didn't know. Whatever. That's okay. It's fine. We're going to take it where we are here, and we're going to look ahead, and we're going to fix this. And, when we look back a year from now, I don't know if you guys ever read The Gap and the Gain. It's such a great book. But, when you look back and you go, I did that. That's probably one of the most fun things I do with a practice or a team member is when we can take them from where we're in such a bad spot, and then we can look back a year later and go, wow, we did all of these things. Look what you did. Look what you could accomplish. You just needed some direction and help. That's always the fun part.
It is. For us, it's, and I don't speak for Nick, but I imagine for us, it's that thinking about looking back at that first coffee we had with the doctor, that first introductory call or email, fast forward to, a state-of-the-art brand new practice that they're working out of. And you can't help but think, wow, I mean, we do this every day. It never, but it never ceases to leave us feeling proud and thankful to be a part of that project.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just say, I am so thankful for commercial brokers like yourselves, in having somebody that really thinks about, because, what I think so many people don't understand is the work that goes into that LOI, into that lease agreement, is going to affect a doctor for a minimum of 10 years. I know in orthodontics, we sign, 10-year leases with 3 and 5-year continuations. And if you don't have the right person working on your behalf, fighting for you, fighting for the right TI amount, fighting for, the right rental amount, the right triple net, all of those things that just seem like, oh, that's just numbers and whatever, it can drastically affect where you're going to be and your bottom line over the length of the next 10 years. I think I am just so thankful for, and like I said, commercial brokers like you guys out there that are doing that and actually care to make a difference in that, because it is very, very impactful and makes a big difference with my clients for sure.
Well, we really appreciate you saying that. I mean, we pride ourselves in being, in helping give our clients the tools so that they can make the best decisions, because a lot of times, there's a lot of numbers and a lot of details that, for me and Remy and you, maybe you're familiar with this type of stuff. When they're at that part of the process, it is brand new, and it is,
sure.
it is, when you're signing a million or a $1.2 or $3 million lease, it's real, and so, I think that really, you got to really work hard to get the best terms, and our job is to help, convey what these terms actually mean, but also give them that type of flexibility, because, the worst things that can happen is you're the way that the lease is structured, you don't have renewal options, or the way that, there's just so many different layers where things can go bad if you don't have somebody that knows what's going on. And so, you really have to understand the market. You have to have good timing, and you have to have a strong advocate, I think, to really, make the best decision ultimately, because you can't just, sometimes, there's one space that calls to the doc, but you gotta investigate everything. You gotta understand the market to really, you might end up at that space, and whether the deal terms are better or worse, it's not my job to make the decision. It's my job to give you the information so that you can make the best decision. And by best decision, I mean the most informed decision, because you can't just make decisions, in a vacuum. You got to really weigh everything out, and there's so much to think about. Demographics, visibility, who your referral partners are going to be, and so it's just it's not something that you can really take lightly. And so it's a good step. We spend a lot of time with our clients making sure.
So your history goes back 18 and then 30 years in the space, which is tremendous. I wasn't counting, but the years. But let's look forward, and are there opportunities or challenges that you see orthodontics facing in the coming years?
I am very excited about our space and where we're going to be. I know there's naysayers out there all the time about, corporates coming in and there's not going to be any more private practices. And I don't know. I look at that and say, I think consumers in general want options. And, I know that's a very, kind of, some people might get a pinch from me using, a consumer, but our patients are consumers. I mean, the reality of it is they've got a choice. They've got a choice on where they're going to go and where they're going to spend their money. And so, I think that there is still plenty of opportunity out there. I would highly encourage doctors, if you're thinking about doing a startup, do it. If you've got the right demographics, you've got the right team working for you, there is no reason that you cannot be successful. Do you have to do the work? Absolutely. And it's hard work. You don't just get to open up at your doors and everybody, comes flying in. You got to do the work. But if you've chosen the right location, you've looked at those demographics, you've done your research, you know where you're going to go, you know what your competition is, you know how to position yourself, there's absolutely no reason why you can't be successful. So I'm very excited about where we're going. I don't see it as, doom and gloom and the sky is falling. Another thing that, I think is really exciting about just our industry in general is that, we are really moving to this more digital workspace where, in orthodontic offices, we don't need these 5,000 square foot offices anymore. We can get a lot of work done and have a lot of production done in, 1,500, 2,500 square feet spaces. And, now it's about just being smart. Not that we haven't been smart before, but I think even more so just being really dialed in with efficiencies. And my prediction and what I'm coaching doctors on is we don't need these really big practices with lots and lots of team members. We need refined and defined team members that are they're very specific about what they're doing and how they're working within our practices to help, with our overhead and whatnot. But I think just, more digital components. We see a lot of digital brackets right now out there where doctors are making custom brackets in our orthodontic field now that are specifically fit, to fit right onto, the anatomy of every single person's tooth, to all of our aligner treatments that are out there. And I think what it in turn is doing is it's meeting the needs of patients that are out there, of consumers that are out there, and, we think about remote monitoring, being able to meet a patient on their couch or to check out how their retainer fits without them actually having to come into your office and waste your chair time. All of these different things are really amazing things, I think, within our industry that's coming. Some of them are already here, and we're just refining and defining and making them better and better. I'm super excited about where our industry is going and where our patient care is going to be even 10 years from now. Excites me.
I love, looking in the future technology.
Mm-hmm.
We were at the Washtenaw District Dental General Meeting, one of our districts here in Michigan. It's where U of M program is. And we sat next to a professor who teaches all 4 years. Plus she's involved in specialty programs. And she mentioned digital dentistry. And it caught my ear and I said, what is that? And she went on and on about, explaining all the different tools and efficiencies that they create. And it was unbelievable. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm glad you mentioned digital again, because I thought I lost my opportunity earlier to say so, but my doctor's office, and I was there just today, finally after years got, I have Apple Pay. So, but tap to touch, tap to pay technology implemented. And it's one of those little things. If I could say to everybody and anybody out there, please, I don't want to have to bring my wallet in anywhere. And it just makes that, again, it does create
Mm-hmm.
efficiencies that check in,
Yep.
check out really, really fly. So for anyone who's wondering, we want that.
Yeah.
We want them. We love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, what is sad to me is that I just feel like our industry as a whole, our specialty, the dental specialty has just been really slow to adapt to this. We see it in the med spa industry. We see it in the healthcare industry. We see it at, even nail salons. I can go on and get a nail appointment like that, no problem, and pay and be gone. And, I don't have to touch or talk to anybody really, and it is amazing to me just how slow we have been at that. But I think we're going to see that, we're going to cut that gap pretty quickly here, I think, in the next, 5 years or so.
So we've talked about systems, creating core values, visioning, having a strong brand identity. Once you have you got a dynamite space, any last things that somebody really needs to have to really knock it out of the park?
I think I'm just going to take it all the way back. If if you happen to be a doctor that is looking to do a startup in any of the specialties, I think that, not only with the space, but really being smart about your planning out of the space. Because where you're at, and when you think, I'm a startup doctor, I think a lot of times doctors get in their mind, I'm small, and so I don't need to think about function of a practice. And that's one of the things that I'm always talking to my doctors about is, what are you going to look like when you're a $4 million practice, and how is this space going to work for you? So let's think about it now and plan it out now so that you can grow into that. And so, that would probably be one, maybe little area that I would encourage doctors, and this may sound like a pinch to any of our equipment specialists out there, but I highly encourage my doctors to use some type of an architect that's in the dental field to help design out our offices, because it just gets us more function, I think, and less like boxes and rectangles. When we're looking at hallways and square offices. And I don't mean that offensively, but there's a lot. You guys are spending a lot of money to not only have a good location, but you should make sure. I mean, just really, truly, don't skimp on, on making sure you've thought out the flow and design of your practice.
I love that you said that. I don't think there's anything to apologize for, because if you understand, you understand. We love working with our dental equipment vendors on every project. And we also make sure that we have an architect who does, a lot of dental work or exclusively works in that space. And they play well together on projects. So, I couldn't agree more.
Well, this was a lot of fun. We're coming to the end of our time here. Should I ask, is there anything that we didn't ask that we should have asked before we wrap up, or any last questions that you want to answer?
No, I mean, I feel like we've covered a lot, and, I'm just so thankful to have, been able to be a part of this. And, I always tell, anybody that comes in contact with me, especially anybody that's listening, I'm always here to help, always here to answer questions. I probably do more emails and calls. I don't charge for them, but I really, the biggest thing for me is I just want to make sure that if people are stuck or they've got questions, they know that, that there's a lifeline out there, and I'm definitely there to be that, and always happy to help.
So cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and all this insight. It's great for our audience and for us. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
Jill.
Thanks, guys.